Creator God, let the words and meditations of our hearts and of our mouths always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord our God. Amen. So before I begin the sermon, I wanted to say I'm really touched that I just think it's great you all are doing an offering today for the Friendship Home. I have 3 dear friends who are clients there. 2 of them were previous congregants of mine, and it's a wonderful ministry that the UCC has. And I just think it's just a lovely gesture on your behalf. It speaks of the gospel of love. So now the sermon, Unbinding Ourselves. In today's text, we read of Lazarus and of his sisters and of his death. And Jesus, rabbi, teacher, crying tears over the death of his friend, humanity before us. Can you imagine? Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. No other section of sacred text shows Jesus so deeply full of emotion. His full divinity and full humanity meeting in the expression of his grief. And Jesus, it says in the sacred text, did not just cry, but he wept. The very name Lazarus in Hebrew means God will help. I've always imagined that the tears of Jesus must have had a profound effect on Mary. We are reminded here of the verse in Psalm 34:18 that God is near to the brokenhearted, and that God is not only the one who collects our tears in a bottle, as it says in Psalm 56, but in the Christ, God also sheds tears on our behalf. And Lazarus has been dead 4 days, and that's when Jesus was able to get there, his close friend entombed already. Jesus leans down, as we just heard, into the tomb and asked Lazarus to come out. And Lazarus came out, and Jesus said to the disciples, "Unbind him and let him go." And Lazarus' body became the revelation of the living God. Lazarus, you see, had become ill and died, as we just heard, before his natural lifespan. It wasn't fair. His family grieved like ours would do, and Jesus' voice reached him and summoning him. Not because his life was any more deserving than anyone else, but because his work on earth wasn't completed. I wonder this day who Lazarus became. Did he become a walking saint? Did he go on and live in different ways, walking in the footsteps of his friend, the rabbi? No matter how Lazarus lived out his life, he certainly bore witness to God's love with every breath. As long as he walked this earth, Lazarus was an avatar of God's mercy. We, too, are asked to be avatars of God's mercy. Our vocation as saints of God is no less or no greater than Lazarus, brought to life by the Christ, the light of the world. We bear God in our hearts, our bodies, and our spirits. In spite of our flaws, in spite of our failings, we bear the Christ out into this world. And others around us bear the light for us as well. We are reminded of our interconnectedness with all people. For the loss of any is lament for all. No one should tread this path of grief alone. We affirm continually that every image bears the face of God, and that all people are holy, all bodies are holy, and sometimes there are saints among us. My mother, father, and I were walking back from the Fox Theater late one night in downtown Atlanta. It was the early 70s. And as we walked along, I saw an unhoused person ahead of us sitting on the sidewalk, his back against a building. She, too, must have seen him off in the distance. I still remember walking between my parents down the sidewalk, holding their hands and swinging our arms. And as we moved closer to the man, my mother on my right, she gracefully dropped her right shoulder, and the heavy satin lining of her coat swiftly and quietly slid off her right arm, and then the other arm in one swift motion. She quietly leaned down, wrapped her coat around the man's shoulders, clasped his hands in hers, looked him in the eye, handed him some cash, and uttered a blessing. She stood and we walked on down the street, me between the two of them, holding hands again, one of us without a coat. No mention of what just happened, because you see, it was natural, it was effortless, it was just the way she lived her life. And we got in the car to head home that night. You see, my mother, she came about it honestly in this life, helping those without. It was something she learned when she was growing up, this giving, this helping. My mother used to stand in the dining room of her grandparents' home, her face pressed up against the floor-length windows that overlooked a long covered back porch that spanned the width of the family home on Merriman Avenue in Asheville, North Carolina. My mother would watch folks on the long back porch eagerly awaiting her small task. Her grandmother would come and hand her the basket of rolls and tongs and say, "Now, Anne, these people are people just like you and me. They're down on their luck and need a good meal and some conversation. Some of them are living in the railroad cars down at the tracks. So look them in the eye and say hello and serve them. And remember, we are all the same in this world. And mercy and compassion are what we have to offer here in this home." My mother would, with glee, she used to tell this story, she would walk the back porch handing rolls to each of the folks on the porch, their plates perched on their knees, covered with white linen napkins, eating a hot midday meal off fine china and using silver flatware. My mother loved handing out rolls to the folks who wandered into town by way of the railway. It was known all over town in Asheville that if you made your way to the back porch of the house at the top of the hill on Merriman Avenue, that my great-grandmother would serve you a hot midday meal, no questions asked. Friends in town would whisper how my great-grandmother, Miss Leela, was so foolish. She didn't mind if her fine silver slipped into the pockets of the men. And truly, she didn't care. She used to say if they need it that bad, they should take it. They need it worse than I do. Perhaps watching this as a small child on a daily basis for my mother was her inspiration of her life work with the unhoused in Atlanta for almost 45 years. Silently, selflessly, with no hesitation, that coat slid off her shoulders. You see, she unbound herself from the trappings of the world. She learned it from watching her great-grandmother feed the unhoused off the back porch, the life of service. I once sat in a dark meditation room surrounded by the icons of the saints. I was at a clergy retreat outside of Baltimore. Some of the typical saints were depicted on the walls along with the modern-day saints. Mother Teresa, Teresa of Avila, St. Francis, St. Clare, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, Gandhi, Dorothy Day. I thought of those who've walked before us and those who walk among us and those who will come long after we've left this earth, the saints in this life. Nadia Bolz-Weber reminds us in her book, Accidental Saints, that never once did Jesus scan the room for the best example of someone who was living their life holy and send that person out to tell others about him. No, he always sent the stumblers and the sinners. I find that comforting, Nadia goes on to say. He sent the imperfect people just like us, people trying to live in gospel ways. And we don't have any perfect people here this morning. What makes us followers of the way of love is not our ability to be saintly, but rather God's ability to work through flawed people. God's ability to unbind us from our own selves. For God did not enter our world of snowy, silent peace on earth, a suspended reality of Christmas, but rather God slipped into the vulnerability of skin and entered our violent and disturbing world. And when we put aside religion and the horrific past of using religion to start wars and damage entire peoples, when we realize that we should not let our own religious story inflate us, for we're no better for our own story, when we forget about denominations and insurance policies for some life after this, when we take everything away, when we unbind ourselves, we're left with the gospel, which says we are to live our lives in service of other. Letting the other people go in traffic without yelling and honking, who knows? Maybe they're rushing to the hospital to be near a loved one. Holding the door at the post office for no other reason than because we can, feeding and clothing the poor, sending an offering to the friendship home, sometimes not just writing a check from our comfort zones, but getting our feet on the ground and going. Making a meal for the dwelling place, gathering supplies for backpack heroes, using the church kitchen to cook for those in need, make sandwiches for the outdoor church, opening doors to 12-step programs, inviting a neighbor we don't know well to a meal here or to a concert here in Ripley, serving at the local food pantry, maybe using space here for a hospice home for the dying who have no one else and no resources. As a friend of mine always reminds her congregation, and I always chuckle when I hear her say it because she says it often, you didn't hire me to represent you out into the world to do religious things for you. You called me, God called me, to walk in gospel ways right alongside you, serving in the world, not judging, not worrying about whether someone takes an extra meal at the dwelling place. We're called to unbind ourselves and go, living a life like Lazarus, for God simply keeps reaching down into the dirt of humanity and resurrecting us from the graves we dig for our own selves through our violence, our lives, our selfishness, our arrogance, and our own addictions. And God keeps loving us back to life over and over again. God pushes us out into the world this day, saying, go be love. Go be love without fanfare or credit given or awards or attention drawn. Just simply go. May we unbind ourselves and seek to serve those out in the world and seek to serve those right before us on the porches of our own lives. Amen.